Hi, welcome back to the Roland Theater and to the Center Film Festival. We are very happy to be a part of this wonderful festival again, and we're very, very grateful to be one of the nonprofits receiving a portion of the ticket proceeds. That is really going to help us. We are in the middle of a seating project. The theater is going to turn 104 years old in 2021. The seating is decades and decades old and is really needed to be replaced. So these funds will help us. These funds will also help us survive COVID. We're struggling. We're hoping to get to our seating project, and every little bit helps. We're really looking forward to a great weekend of films, and we know you are too. And hopefully in the future, we can actually all be together at the Roland Theater. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. I am Pearl. Oh, sorry. I love this live world that we're in. I am Pearl Gluck. I'm one of the co-founders of the film festival, and right there you have Kurt Chandler, who is the co-founder as well with me. And we're so happy to have you back on such a gorgeous day. I know you're watching the game. I will say literally nothing about it, but Kurt will. What are you going to say, Kurt, about the game?
I'm going to say that if you're feeling guilty about watching this and you've got a little bit of FOMO about the game, the score is 24-6. So just sit back and relax. We're going to have a very non-stressful event here, and you can enjoy talking with us about films.
Yes, and a word about what you just saw with the Roland Theater. One of the reasons that we have the chair as our poster is because the Roland Theater is doing a drive this year. They're usually where we host the film festival, and we're so happy that we're able to benefit them in some way. And one of the reasons we can benefit them is because of the support from the Penn State University Bellisario College of Communications, who has been our supporter from the very beginning, which was last year. And I'm just so honored to have Dean Marie Hardin with us today, not in the capacity as Dean, but in the capacity of her research work, which is in sports and women in sport journalism and so on. So as you can imagine, I'm sure you'll agree with me, she was a perfect fit for hosting this conversation. Let's bring in the filmmakers. So this is Marie Hardin. You'll be meeting her in a moment. This is Catharine Axley. She, as you know, is the director of Affleck, which is that feature documentary about the dog sled legend. She'll tell you a lot more about that. Her work has been awarded across the documentary world, mostly for impact and vision and for creativity, as I'm sure you would agree. And she was the 2020 selectee of the American Film Showcase program this year. And again, I'm sure you would understand why. And we're super excited to have her here to talk about her film live. And the other two filmmakers are Paddy Cotter, directed the short Running Home under the tutelage of John Affleck. Paddy was a student here at the time, and one of the things we love doing at the College of Communications is supporting students in order to be able to have them succeed greatly when they get out of here. So what they do is they partner with some of us, the faculty, and they make work. And this is one of the examples, and I think you'll agree with me, it's a really powerful one. So what John Affleck does is he heads up the Curley Center. I'll tell you a lot more about that in the conversation with Marie. And this is one of his visionary incentives and initiatives where he works with students, and he'll tell you more about those. This is, I think, the first. It might be the second, if I remember correctly. I'll tell you more about that. So I'm just going to pop out. I just really wanted to personally be here for just a moment. Thank you for taking the time to be here live or watch it in recording. Please definitely give us your thoughts right here. We have the comments. You can ask questions. We'll read them for you. Other than that, have a wonderful Q&A. And with that, I give you Marie Hardin.
Thank you so much, Pearl, and thank you for Kurt. And I just watched the films, and I'm so excited about this conversation. As Pearl said, I'm with the Donald P. Bellisario College of Communications. We have an active film production program and a journalism program where we have some folks who do documentary work like John Affleck. And so there's a lot of synergy, I think, between those programs and the film and the students who can benefit from our film production expertise. Also, our journalism and documentary production expertise. Patty, you were one of those students. So we have the John Curley Center for Sports Journalism, and we also have the film production program. John Affleck, it leads our John Curley Center for Sports Journalism. He's our night chair for Sports Journalism and Society. Comes to us with a lot of experience, high-level experience covering sports around the world for the Associated Press. And made that, John, can you, and I'm going to ask all of you this, but John, I want to start with you because this is so interesting to me. Your evolution to wanting to tell stories in the documentary format. Can you talk about that?
Sure, Marie, thanks. And thanks to everybody at the festival for having us and showing our film. It's great to be here. What I'd say is, originally, the first documentary short that we made through the Curley Center, in which Patty was also a critical piece of the team, was a film about European fans of American football, and that came out of a project where we had been going to big events and covering them both in terms of the results, but also culturally. And we had a terrific, lucky opportunity to cover the NFL games in London, and we realized that no one needed us to cover those games. The Miami Dolphins and the New Orleans Saints have a press corps that covers that stuff. So it occurred to me to get involved in the documentary space, and that led to a previous film that did very nicely on. Called Quiet Sundays, which did very nicely on the festival circuit, and just really gave me personally the bug to create more stories in film, because it's a really different storytelling space than print, which is sort of my home, where I sort of have learned how to tell stories. And then getting to running home, the Harvard report on the devastation of Hurricane Maria came about and showed that the death toll and damage was far higher than initially estimated. And I thought it would be great to try to build a project around trying to bring some of the Puerto Rican stories out. And it so happens that a dear friend of mine in New York is a track coach, and is Tony. And I just went to him and said, hey, can we make a film about your life and include this piece of it? And he was all on board. And I said to myself, basically, I know I've got one great Puerto Rican story, and I know that I've got a great director in Paddy Cotter. So let's put this all together and let's make it happen.
So I'm curious. I want to do just one quick follow-up, and then I want to ask Catherine about her sort of the way she sees documentary filmmaking. But John, how does documentary filmmaking, do you see that as a form of journalism?
Certainly. I see it as a form of truth-telling. I think it depends on the approach of the filmmaker, whether it's journalism. I can give you examples of people who do it. Ours is certainly journalistic in its approach and its ethics. There are great documentary makers like Werner Herzog who really approach it very non-journalistically. So it can be either. But in our case, and in the case of our Penn State program, it is journalistically based. We're trying to, one of the points of our film was to bring to light and shed light on the fact that that all of these lives have been lost, and the devastation that has occurred in Puerto Rico happens to actual real people who have real lives who you might not know, and they're innocent, people who didn't deserve these things to happen. And so kind of putting a human face and a real tale on what's happening. So I think that, yes, it's journalistically based. And I would say, I'm just going to quick plug, this film got national distribution through Quelly TV and has now been seen by more than 100,000 people. So there's an audience to hear those stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Catherine, Atla, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's going to be aired in December nationally too, right?
Or it was aired last December. So
Okay.
2019, yeah.
Okay. So both of these documentaries have had national distribution. Can you talk a little bit, Catherine, about what got you interested in documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, so I got into documentary filmmaking through my my interest in Caribbean history. In college I studied I was a history and ethnicity, race and migration double major, and I was really interested in the history of tourism in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and you know, I wasn't quite sure what that would lead to in terms of a career, but in a class I watched, I had the chance to watch a couple documentaries that kind of informed my understanding of the region and the history, and I was so impressed with how these stories in this format, with music, with you know, with observational footage, with archival footage, could inform and move me at the same time. So actually the film I credit as the film that really kind of made me think that this could be a career for me was a film about a journalist, but about a radio journalist. It's The Agronomist by Jonathan Demme, and about a radio journalist in Haiti. And so after having watched that film and kind of thinking about you know, what this space was, I was able to start doing some unpaid internships after college to start learning a little bit on the job. But I've always kind of approached documentary from this historical angle. I'm really interested in just spending time looking at archival footage. So almost all of my films have some sort of archival element, kind of as an excuse to just immerse myself in the past, and then find a way to give that footage new life in a present day context. And you know, I was able to do that with Atla.
You said your initial interest involved the Caribbean, and we just watched a documentary you made with a lot of snow in it. Not in the Caribbean. Can you talk for just a minute about tell us the story about how you came to this project?
Yeah, so I have a friend who's a state representative in Alaska who we just found out just a couple of days ago won his re-election. I'm very excited for him. And I had been following his career, and he was involved on a bill to recognize Native languages of Alaska as official languages of the state. So I initially traveled to Alaska with the idea of doing research on a film around language revitalization, which, you know, is something quite different from what I ended up doing. And I was interested in the intersection of language and political power. And I'd kind of been inspired in part from this film, The Agronomist, that really delves into that. But while I was in Alaska, I read an article about George Atla, who at that time was 80 years old. And I, you know, knew nothing about dog mushing. I'd never heard of him. But I was immediately drawn into this as a potential topic because first, you know, he was this champion dog sled racer who, you know, was known throughout Alaska. He was, you know, he's considered the Babe Ruth of Alaska, or the Muhammad Ali of Alaska. And so that, of course, was interesting. But what made me even more intrigued was that, you know, in a way similar to John and Patty's film, you know, he at this later stage of his life kind of, you know, was embarking on a new project and finding new meaning in the sport that, you know, that in which he had participated for over 5 decades. So I was really interested in looking at his new project, introducing dog mushing as a form of cultural revitalization to youth in his community and other villages in Alaska, and kind of seeing what that looked like. It was also, you know, as a filmmaker, I also saw this like really great potential story vessel of, this George Atlet, age 80, teaching a young musher, or at that time we didn't know it was going to be his grandnephew, but a young student in his village, teaching him how to mush and train for a race. There's that built-in story arc of the training for a race, and this intergenerational aspect was also really interesting. So I was really interested in having that story arc as a way to then dip into key moments of George's past story, and not only to explore George's past story and his career, which again was so long, so many years long, but also as a way to explore key shifts in Alaskan history, because so much has happened in Alaska in the past 80 years. So that I was really interested in how the shifting economies and culture and the impact of Westernization in Alaska during this period of time was intimately integrated into George's story.
Wow, you have given me a lot of threads I want to pull, and we're going to come back to a few of the ideas you raised. Paddy, I want to ask you to talk for a few minutes as such a new, you're really new to this vocation, to this art of documentary filmmaking, and both of the documentaries that you've been involved with John Affleck have been around sports. And I'm curious to know from you whether you see that. Tell me about the, Catherine used the term story vessel. Talk to me about, how do you see sports as acting as a kind of a story vessel? And do you anticipate that you'll continue to want to make those kinds of documentaries?
That's a great question. One that John and I have talked about at length. Why sports storytelling? There's so many different areas you can make a documentary on and focus on, whether it's politics or social issues. I love sports, and I think John loves sports because it's a lens to tell a bigger, more human story through. Like Catherine said, you get this narrative backbone in sports stories. Someone is trying to achieve something. Things that seem simple. There's a winner and there's a loser. Through that and digging through all of that, you can get a lot of what it means to be human. And I think that's what John and I really want to find in our previous projects and projects going forward. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to function in this society and try to tell those stories and inspire other people? And that's what we got so lucky with Tony's story. I mean, he's such an inspirational guy. He continues to be an inspiration for me, not just thinking about how I can, become better in my career and how I can advance, but, looking out for others. How can you help the people in your circle and focus on them more? So, but you get that narrative backbone that I just love so much. And I grew up around sports. My brother was a big runner. I loved watching him and cheering for him. And obviously coming to Penn State, it's hard not to be a big sports fan. But yeah, I think that's why it's focused. It's a lens. You can tell a political story. You can tell a social issue story. You can tell all these different genres of stories, but through that lens of sports, you get that nice narrative backbone that's really nice.
Speaking of Penn State sports, I will just mention for any of you who are curious, the score now is 27-6 Nebraska. So just putting that out there. But
I don't like that narrative backbone.
Us, folks.
Right. So both of these films involve sort of a deep dive look into the life, of somebody who there's just a really rich life there to work with. But both of you ended up also working with the family of the family was a big part of that. And I'm just of your filmmaking, and I'm just curious, how does that complicate matters to have, or maybe it doesn't, to have the family so being such a big part of the documentary? Catherine, can we start with you, because yours clearly had this multi-generational family involvement? Yeah.
Well, I think so. And I do stutter sometimes, so you may hear that a little bit. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that my first my first trip to Huslia, where George lived, which is, you know, a small village northwest of Fairbanks, kind of in the center of Alaska, a village of, you know, under 300 people, is that the village life is you know, is all about family, and so being in Huslia, you know, it even for other households who are not family members of George's, you know, there was this kind of inherent there was this inherent family aspect, just kind of being in Huslia. You know, when we didn't have the camera rolling, we would go to birthday dinners, and you know, just kind of hang out with other with other people in the area. I mean, I think with Atla, I mean, one thing that I really enjoyed was being able to get to know George, you know, after he passed away. We did not expect him to pass away. So a big part of the film was conducting interviews with his family members after he had passed. And so that was kind of a really unique lens for me to get to know this man who I had only known for, you know, 4 or 5 months before he passed away, and kind of be able to share these you know, these intimate moments with his family members as they were kind of dealing with his loss. So I felt very, you know, very fortunate that I was welcomed in that way to be able to ask some of these questions, and kind of share, you know, with these family members as they were still, you know, still dealing with his unexpected loss.
Did you have to, just a quick follow-up, did you have to manage the concerns of these family members, though, as you're finishing up this documentary? Their concerns about the framing of the story you were telling, or not?
Yeah. I mean, well, so I was very lucky in that Joe Beifelt, who you know, is featured in the film and is George's grandnephew. He was, you know, he was intimately involved in the post-production process. He watched probably more cuts than he cared to see, and it took a long time for us to figure out exactly what his voiceover and ended up being. I did many trips to Alaska where I just recorded, you know, hours and hours of conversations and interviews with him to kind of figure out what his voiceover, which, you know, there's not that much voiceover, but it did take a long time to figure that out. So I was lucky in that I did get constant feedback from him. But for other family members, it was tricky because we didn't know, you know, until after George had passed away, and I did these interviews with family members, that we were going to include this aspect of George, you know, having dealt with, you know, having had a dark period of his life, which we only touch on, we don't go into so much. But that I was not sure how family members were going to react, because not all family members shared that with me on camera in these interviews. So we did do a rough cut screening for family members just to kind of gauge their reaction. We also did a, you know, kind of going off what I initially said, that Huslia itself, there's this family aspect, even if you're not related by blood. We did also do a rough cut screening there because, you know, I thought it was really important that you know, that they first know what it was, the shape that this film had taken, you know, by that point. And I did want to get feedback from them and make sure that everyone felt comfortable, because, you know, it is a lot to ask to show one's community on screen like that. So those two screenings were a way to ensure that everyone felt okay about how they were being portrayed.
Wow. What you're talking about a family that was right there. With John and Patty, with your film, the family was, you know, many thousands of miles away. And I think there was a language barrier. Am I? So I guess I'd love to know. And on top of that, Tony himself talks about, right, very openly about his addiction is very much part of the documentary. So can you talk about how you worked with the family under those circumstances?
Sure. And honestly, more similarities than differences to Catherine's experience. You have people who are rural, who have a pretty simple lifestyle. And, the good thing was that Tony and I have a relationship that goes back to 2001. And so I knew, in more than broad outlines, I knew his story, but I didn't know it to the depth I got to know it. And I didn't know Tony to the depth I've gotten to know him and have become just much closer through this experience and his openness. And we just really were able to be very straightforward with each other about what we needed, what we thought, what the truth was. And so and like Catherine, we had moments where we looked at a cut and we said, it's missing this heart of the story that we know is there. So we went back a few times and had interviews and shot a little bit more footage with Tony in New York. As far as the family in Puerto Rico, we had a couple of things going for us. One was Tony vouched for us essentially and said, these guys are okay. And we tried to come in as low key as we could and not be like, oh, here we are from Penn State, we're making a film. And, we also had our associate producer, Gianna Hahn, was with us. She was also a student, and she's like one of the nicest people in the world, and they love Gianna. So that made it easier. And by the end, we were essentially adopted by the Ruiz family. We had nice dinners with the family and that sort of thing. So it worked out pretty well. And I think Paddy can speak to this maybe, but there wasn't some big hidden dark secret that we were dancing around as we made it. I think we felt pretty comfortable that we could just lay out what people said. But we tried to make it clear up front. This isn't aimed to hurt you. It isn't aimed to glorify you, but it's aimed to tell your story.
Yeah, going off of what John said, one of the greatest parts of documentary filmmaking that I found is that it's all about connecting with people. If you can't connect with someone, if you can't get them to trust you, then you're not going to get a story. Tony totally trusted John, and that was kind of opened the door for us. But what I was shocked about is connecting with the family, even though we didn't speak the same language. I didn't even know what we were eating half the time. It was meals I've never had before. I was eating what I thought was a burrito one time, and it turns out it was like a green banana with like beef in it. Just wild things like this. The avocado was the size of my head. I felt like I was in a different world. But I had this awesome human connection with them, and it led to some great footage and great moments, and that's kind of the magic with documentary filmmaking. Initially when I came into Penn State, I wanted to be a writer, and I wrote for the Daily Collegian, wrote for the Altoona Mirror, did every writing job I could. But once I got into the documentary format and realizing that you really have to be there in that moment, you really have to earn that trust. You can't write something in with words. You actually have to film that and capture that moment. That person has to tell you about it. Because John and I, our style, we don't use narrator. We try and get that exact quote. We want to hear the people tell their own story. And that was a huge challenge. That's really hard to do, but we've learned so much about building trust and having that human connection. And Tony is the king of Puerto Rico. He walks down there. We would just be walking down some random street, and people would come out of their houses and give Tony the biggest hug and like, oh my gosh, Tony's here. You would thought he was the hero coming home. So that was just a ton of fun for us.
So it seems to me that going into it, making a documentary already with a relationship with that subject, there's sort of two sides to that coin, it would seem to me. And I guess I would love to hear, I just want to explore a little bit, what were some of the ethical challenges you might have faced, or ethical questions you had to grapple with in making these documentaries? And John and Patty, I'll start with you, and then I want to go to Catherine with that.
Well, I think when you get into issues of addiction and you get into close family relationships, you are opening a cabinet that could get darker than you expect. And so I did have more than a thought that, depending on where the story goes, this could be pretty rough. And then the conditions under which, just simply the conditions under which people suffered in Puerto Rico as a result of the hurricane. I just didn't know what kind of story we were going to hear. At what point, what is the balance you're going to have between distance and telling it straight, that you're going to have to decide. So those are things that we thought about, and that's where we went. But I think at the end you have an obligation to tell the truth and the emotional truth of what your protagonist experienced.
Did you have to negotiate anything, with Tony in terms of what something that maybe you wanted in or he wanted in and you didn't? Or
he had, I can't even remember them. They're so small. He had a couple of factual things. Like we had like a couple of photos wrong. And that was the extent of it. We had a pretty upfront conversation at the beginning that it was going to be that the editorial control was in our hands at the end of the day. But he didn't lobby for anything, or I think he knew we were gonna tell the story. We were gonna tell the truth, and that because of his own personal journey, he is a strong enough man that he's okay having moments where he doesn't look that great, because it's going to help somebody else in circumstances that's as tougher than he was in.
Mm-hmm. Catherine, I'd love to hear about the ethical challenges or kinds of decisions that you had to make.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's really interesting to hear that John has had such a long relationship with Tony, and that does come across in the film. And so I think for me a big challenge was creating a relationship, with trust in a short period of time. And so there were definitely challenges that came up around that. In filming in Huslia, I was staying with George and his partner in their cabin, and it is a small space, and I think as we now know, George was suffering from 2 different kinds of bone cancer. He didn't know it at the time, but he had some days where he was not feeling well, and I think in a way that he could not have anticipated, the camera sometimes provoked reactions in him that were confusing. So for example, one time I was, out there filming him as he was chopping wood. And to me, at that time he was 81, he had already had his birthday. He was 81 years old, chopping wood. It was so cold outside, and, that's not something I could do. That requires a lot of strength. But he kind of shooed me away, like he wanted me to stop filming, and really for the rest of the day he kind of wouldn't speak with me. So I had clearly ruffled feathers, but I didn't really know what it was I had done. So I put the camera away. I saw amazing things happening for the rest of the day, but I was like, no, you just need to not touch the camera for a little bit, because there was something going on, and it took about another day for him to share that he felt that he looked foolish, like that he looked weak when I was filming him chopping wood. He could feel his body, he could feel that his body was not as strong as it had been, perhaps the week before, and he didn't want to be filmed in a way that made him look weak. And he used that word "foolish," which 6 years later, is something that really stands out to me. So there, there were other moments like that. So it was important to find a balance of when to have the camera out and when not to, and to learn to read his body language as to how he was feeling. With Joe, so this project emerged out as a graduate thesis. So I first made a 20-minute short and then expanded it into a feature. And with Joe, there was a challenge that was created after the 20-minute film was completed. I didn't have it screen many places, but I did screen it in Alaska, and it was playing at a hospital, at a native hospital in Fairbanks. And I think Joe got some kind of teasing from friends and others saying like, oh, you're in a film, like, oh, you think you're famous, and for him, I mean, you can probably tell from the film, Joe is very quiet and he's very humble, and he's not seeking the spotlight. That is not at all what he's trying to do. So then, in kind of moving from the short to the feature, I had to learn that reaction that he received was real and was hard for him to deal with. So we had to kind of work through that in anticipating what a sort of reaction would be to the longer film, as he was not seeking the spotlight at all.
So we've talked about the relationships with the subject. I want to go back and talk about and ask you all to talk about something that Catherine, you mentioned very early on, but I actually wonder if this isn't sort of really important to all documentary filmmaking. You talked about this idea of liking to be immersed in the past, and I guess I wonder if documentary filmmaking in many ways is about sort of pulling on the past into the present. In other words, making that connection. And Paddy and John, I guess, let me start with you all. Were you all thinking, talk to me about how you think about the relationship between past and present as you're telling these stories?
Well, my guide on that actually goes back to print, and it sticks with me. I was writing an anniversary story, and I can't remember what the news event was that we were marking, but my editor said, just remember that every anniversary story is about now. It's about now. And so what he meant by that is it's about how the actors in the thing that happened in the past feel and have come to terms with what occurred. And so I think that anytime you're doing a nonfiction piece and you're writing about things that happened in the past, you're coming to terms with it. You are telling your story. The protagonist is telling their story about that moment. I mean, I was fascinated in Atla about George's early illness, and that he spends all this time away from his family. It feels like that's a film in and of itself, that could be, but that's not where those people wanted to put the focus of their lives or tell their story. So it can play out in myriad ways when you actually get rolling. But yeah, I think basically it's the protagonist coming to terms with the events they were part of and were impacted by.
Anything that you would, as you're developing as a filmmaker, anything that you're starting to think about this idea of past and present in filmmaking?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think it's one of the shifts happening in documentary film. Rather than just taking a specific historical event and telling the documentary, very Ken Burns style, going into those characters in the past and trying to make them come alive. I think now you're seeing a lot more stories that are the camera is there in the moment. And Running Home is such a it's such an important piece to me. But one moment I wish we were there for was when he runs the race that actually raises all the money. And I think about that all the time when I'm thinking about other stories or future stories, is how can you be there at that race? How can you be there at that moment when the story is happening? I think that's one thing Catharine did great. She found the story that was happening in that moment, which is he was training someone for a race. Finding that active narrative to attach to and filming that happening, it has a ton of power to it, and it can make the past, you can accomplish everything you want to in looking back and telling the history and capturing that past in a journalistic way, but you can attach it to a narrative that has the viewer moving forward. So that's an exciting development in documentary film, and one I just think about constantly. How can I be there? How can I be the one filming that race that I'm going to be using in the film?
Wow, that's great. That's great. So I have to ask though, Catharine, you talked about getting to, and you had lots of archival shots in Atla. Are you ever limited? I mean, how much do the limits on what you can get in terms of archival footage, can that impact sort of how you have to tell the story?
Yeah. Most definitely. And I for this film, I was inspired by a film from 2011. I don't know if you guys have seen it, called Senna by Asif Kampadia, which is about a Formula One race car driver from Brazil, which I highly recommend. I have no interest in Formula One race car driving, but this film gripped me, and I've watched it probably like 10 times. And that film is incredible because it's entirely archival. So in a way similar to what Paddy's saying, there's all this footage that was shot in the moment. It turns out that the Formula One organization had, that they were shooting everything. So these filmmakers had a treasure trove to work from and craft an incredibly beautiful and poignant and interesting film entirely from archival footage. They did do interviews after the fact and used audio, but so that's kind of what I had in mind when I decided to turn this film into a feature from a short. But I soon learned that no, that was not going to be possible. There were limits to how much archival footage was available. I was lucky, that there was some footage, and certainly footage of George. But I did not have access to this incredible Formula One treasure trove that the directors of Senna did. But one thing that really stands out to me with this film is that I kind of see this the past kind of functioning in two ways for me. One is kind of on a society level, just being able to share this footage of these races from the 50s, 60s, and 70s that haven't really been shared that much in kind of mainstream films, that there was this vibrant, exciting sport that existed in Alaska. It still exists, but not nearly to the extent that it existed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I really wanted to bring this footage, to a national audience, so that we could see this, footage, learn about this sport, that it wasn't just in the archives. And one thing about that was really interesting is that a lot of a lot of Alaskans, were tuned into these races during this time, but tuned in via the radio. They were at home in their villages or in the cities listening to the radio broadcast. So one thing that didn't hit me until we actually had screenings of the film in Alaska is that for a lot of people, this was the first time they actually even saw these races that they had followed. And that experience just kind of blew me away. Like, that was probably one of the most rewarding aspects of this project, was being able to sit with elders in Alaska who had followed these races, these specific races, but this was the first time they were seeing them on film. Then the other thing that stands out to me, about the past in this film that is similar to what John was saying was through George's story and through seeing him in the present day as an 81-year-old, it was a chance to kind of see on a personal level how one's past influences, each stage of one's life. And the way we kind of crafted the film is that this period of time where George was training Joe was a chance for him to kind of come to terms with both what he had achieved in his life, but also, perhaps some regrets that he had throughout his life. So being able to engage with the past on kind of a society-wide level, in terms of kind of seeing this period of Alaskan history, this sport at its most vibrant and exciting period, and then kind of being able to see one's life, and how past personal experiences inform who one becomes. That was kind of really interesting to me.
That's great, Catherine. You're talking about so many of the different tensions that you all deal with, right? Whether those are in relationships you're navigating or past versus present. And so it's really fascinating. I have a question. I want to swing it back to Paddy, because Paddy, I think folks are really who are watching this are intrigued, because you're this budding documentary maker very early in your career. Jennifer Krolakowski writes, Paddy's such a talented young man. Very impressed with his point of view on documentary filmmaking at the moment, right? That's what we've been talking about. The question is, Paddy, how do you differentiate the personal connections you create versus the professional mannerisms that need to come along, or that do come along with filming?
That's a great question. I really appreciate. Very nice audience member. That's interesting. Balancing that, I think they're one and the same. You kind of have to maintain that idea that you're there to tell a story and you're there to be a professional. But if you're not having fun through the process, then your subject won't be having fun through the process. If you're not enjoying the conversations, if you're not cracking jokes, if they're not laughing and you're not laughing, that all feeds into one cohesive thing. Then if you guys are laughing and enjoying each other's company, everything else falls in line. Now, obviously, journalistically, you have to keep up some barriers, but especially Tony. I mean, Tony likes to dance. Tony likes to laugh. Tony likes to tell stories. So we shared so much of that, off camera, that by the time we got around to pressing play, it was just two friends, talking it out. I think maintaining those professional values while being their friend. I mean, you get such a better story when you're able to kind of break down the barrier of I'm pressing play, now say something interesting, to, hey, let's have a conversation. What was that like? What was the hardest part you've ever, hardest part of your life? And I just enjoyed the process so much, and my favorite part of the process is learning about people and connecting with them.
That's great. I want to, we just have about 10 minutes left. So what I want to do is ask you all, and Catherine, I want to start with you. You mentioned earlier this notion of the rewards of documentary filmmaking and the work that you do. I'd love for you, all three of you, to tell me, talk to us about what are the rewards you're seeking in doing these projects, and what's the impact you hope to make?
Yeah, well, with Atla, I was really interested, again, having come to the project from a place of having expected to make a film on language revitalization. I was really interested in seeing how dog mushing could be a form of cultural revitalization. And at first I kind of wasn't sure what to make of that. It wasn't until I was with George and with other kids in this community and seeing how the sport of dog mushing in Huslia was a way for elders to connect with youth, and that the whole community came together to train, to take care of these dogs, and to also do these community races. So it wasn't until all of that I kind of recognized how powerful a sport could be in a community, especially a sport that obviously is has a long history as not just a sport, as a way of life, for thousands of years. So I think with this film, what I really kind of hope comes across is that is for audiences to see that there can be unique forms of cultural revitalization. Of course, I believe strongly in the significance and power of language revitalization. I think that is something we really need to stress. In communities all over, and especially in Alaska. But that there are these kind of other ways of connecting different generations, and of connecting youth with their culture and their history. So I would hope that this film kind of inspires other communities to kind of embark on cultural revitalization projects of their own. They can start small. I guess the other point of impact I hope this film creates is maybe one more specific to Alaska, but for viewers seeing Joe, strive and not be the next George Atla, that's not going to happen. But for him to find his own definition of success and to really kind of embrace becoming a teacher, I hope that that other kids in Alaska and perhaps elsewhere kind of are inspired to become future educators. Right now, there is a need for more Alaskan and Alaskan Native educators. A lot of public school educators come from the lower 48, and so there's a high turnover rate in Alaskan communities. So it's really exciting because right now Joe is teaching back in his community in Huslia. He taught for a year in the city of Fairbanks last year, but right now he's teaching in Huslia. And so I hope that other young people who see the film might come away with the idea of like, oh, maybe I could be a teacher. That is something noble, and so I hope that Joe's story and Joe can be a role model for some kids.
Oh, I love that. John and Patty, what are you hoping for in terms of impact with your work?
Patty, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll take this one first. John and I are extremely motivated right now to tell more stories. I think we completely have the documentary bug. We know the impact it can have. We know what it's like to tell these stories, and it's such an invigorating process. But one of our primary goals is that the next Paddy Cotter that comes through Penn State and is extremely motivated and really wants to get into storytelling, doesn't quite know which storytelling he wants to do. Maybe doesn't have the skills. I didn't have any skills heading into freshman year, but luckily John, took a risk on bringing me on to his first documentary team he ever assembled. But I really hope that next Paddy Cotter can get that opportunity. And John and I, we really want to work with Penn State in the future in getting kids at the college involved in these projects, because I think there's so much value. Even if they don't want to become documentary filmmakers, there's so much value in telling a story in the documentary format. It applies to everything. If you can be a really good documentary filmmaker, you can do all sorts of storytelling. You can do all sorts of anything, because it's just a series of problem solving while maintaining a smile on your face and saying it's going to be okay. So John and I have been just constant conversations. How can we get more students involved? How can the next Paddy Cotter, fall in love with documentary filmmaking like I did?
Oh, that's great. And, a little plug for the Bellisario College. We are going to be launching a new media center in coming months. And nothing would make me happier than seeing lots and lots of filmmaking activity, documentary narrative going on in that media center. So Paddy, come back, visit us often, and spread you said the bug for documentary filmmaking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want you to bring that. I want you to bring that back.
Will do. I appreciate the effort that the college has made.
Thank you. John, what would you add?
Just that, there are two impacts, and one is practical. It's having a story about underrepresented group of people get told. Maybe people who in the documentary space, maybe the people who aren't, super glamorous and rich get their story. But at a more sort of granular human level, I'd say the thing that I have really enjoyed about about documentary making is the sheer beauty of working with film, which is just really an amazing medium to work with, and the democraticness of it, going to film festivals and seeing everybody be as creative as they can possibly be, and supporting each other in that way. So events like this one are just fantastic for inspiring old codgers like myself to get out and give it a try and tell a story about what it means to be alive, just as well as you possibly can. And I think that's if I can impart some of that excitement to people, and if I can tell a really good story where you feel like you get out of the film and you feel like, wow, I kind of know that person, and I get some of the messages and lessons that their life can tell me, and I understand a little bit about what it is to be alive, and I understand a little bit more about my world. We're doing okay.
Wow, that's fantastic. So John, Paddy, and Catherine, I got to tell you, this has been just thank you for the talent and the passion and the impact that you're making with your work. This has been a wonderfully energizing conversation for me. And now what I'm going to do is hand it back over to Pearl and ask her to tell us what's next.
There. I'm back. I said magic when I was in New York, which is even more magical. I'm learning so much about this space. But what I've learned is from all of you, I'm so inspired. We have a little private chat among the panelists, which you can't do if we're live in the theater. I can't be like, and one of the things I was writing is like, there's just one quote after another from all of you, from Marie to John to Catherine to Paddy. I'm so inspired. I might even consider doing a sports doc. It's not something I literally ever thought about. I was a huge Gary Carter fan in the 1980s, 86 Mets. But there might be other reasons for that. But hey, I might. You never know. I now know who to reach out to. One of the other things I feel like this panel really spoke to is the energy of working intergenerationally, interculturally, and specifically in our department, in our college. I feel like all of our departments really talk to each other. So we have film making, but we also have broadcast journalism, we have sports journalism, and those overlap and intersperse, and I think we heard a lot about that. My last question to all of you, including you, Marie, is, I know, Paddy, you touched on it a little, which I appreciate, is maybe you can all just talk about what you're working on now, what you're hoping for with your project in the future. So Marie, whether that's your research or the work you're doing with us. I know you talked about the media center. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that? And Catherine, what are you working on now? I do know a little bit about it, but I would love for you to share it with us. Patty, if there's a specific project you're working on, I know you're hopeful for students at Penn State, and we're so grateful for that. And John, your next project as well. Why don't we start with you, John?
I'm writing a course that Marie initiated several years ago, but I'm making my own for the spring semester, and I'm really excited about it. Called Sports Media and Society. I'm writing some short fiction, and Patty and I are talking about a project that isn't far enough along to share at this point.
Right on. So LA. So, we had a bunch of LA filmmakers the other day, yesterday, feels like 10 weeks ago. And they, I said, so what you working on now? And they're like, I can't share. Thanks, John. Welcome to the club. So Patty, I guess that's the same answer. You can't share it with us.
He's got one.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I, for the past couple of years, I've followed a story that has to do with the Penn State lacrosse team and the legacy of Connor Darcy, who died in a car accident in 2015. And it's based around whether or not his brother decides to come to Penn State and to step into the same crease that his brother did. I've learned so much through the process. It's been a heartbreaking process, but also one that just has really enriched my view of grief and what it means to be, in a family and a part of a team. So I've been so lucky, and this is the first time I've ever talked about it publicly too. Hopefully, in the coming months there'll be more information on where it's going. But I've shared the cut with some of my closest people who I trust most. John being the first of those, and we're kind of cutting it down, working on another process. But I started a production company and. Can't wait. I have a notebook, as every filmmaker does. I have a notebook with hundreds of ideas in it. The coronavirus has definitely put a damper on some of those right now. So I'm chomping at the bit to get out there and start using my camera. But as soon as the lockdowns lift and everyone's got a vaccine in their system, I'll be all over the place filming.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that. Thank you, Patty. And Marie, Catherine, what about you? Do you want to talk about your next project? Are you allowed to share it with us?
Yes. I'm not sharing too much because I am still working on access with some people. So we'll see how that goes. But I can share a little bit that the project is around cruise tourism. It's not an expose. It's looking at places and the people within them whose livelihoods are impacted in some way by cruise tourism. I started working on this before the pandemic, and of course now the pandemic and cruise ships don't go so well together. So of course figuring out how to incorporate that. But I'm in development and early production.
Excellent. And Marie, what about you? Anything else you wanted to add to what you're working on now or hopeful for in the near future for your projects?
This all has been so inspiring. I don't have time, unfortunately, to do my own personal kinds of work that I used to do around sports journalism, but I'm working on the strategic plan for the college right now and thinking about the media center. And these kinds of conversations are always so helpful for me and inspire me in thinking about the opportunities and the ways that we can support faculty and students in doing this powerful and creative work. So thank you.
Thank you. And Kurt, speaking of future projects, how's Penn State football going?
I can answer that.
Of course you can.
It's now 27-16. We're climbing back into the game, so we got a shot.
We're a good luck charm. Center Film Festival. You should have heard us on obligatory PSU. My first ever sports show, and maybe ever. I don't think they're ever going to have me back. But I just want to thank all of you for your time. Like I said, I'm really inspired. I know people who are listening will be, whether it's recorded or live. We already heard some comments. And we welcome you back here for the conversation after Ripple Effects. And oops, what time does that start? Let's see. I don't know if you have that handy, Kurt. I'm going to actually talk about what I'm doing to find it, because sometimes people ask. It's in our director Q&A live streaming button, and it's at 3:30. So we'll see you back here live, either on Facebook or YouTube or recorded. I hope you go ahead and watch this series of a couple of shorts and a featured doc dealing with the ripple effects of racism in incredibly powerful, entertaining, and impactful ways. Thank you to all of you. We loved having you, and hopefully we'll see you all in person next year at the Center Film Festival, or just next semester, John and Marie, in the classroom. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.